Let us take a look at another example. Here we have a company called Cloud9 who manufactures cheeses or brings cheeses from outside, from all parts of the world. So we're going to take a look at the database that they have. The database that they have has all these tables. There are 7 of them. And we need to look at the data first to make sure that we understand all the data that they have so that we can start with the relationships and all that stuff. So let's take a look at each one of the tables one by one. So I'm going to start with the cheese. I double click on that. And I see that they have cheese ID, origin of cheese, where it is from, the type of cheese, description of the cheese, and also a rating on the cheese. So we can look at the design view and see that the cheese ID is the primary key and it is a short text. We need to note the data type because whenever we do a relationship, the field names, the primary key as well as the foreign key should have the same data type. That is one of the things that we need to check for. So we know that the primary keys here is cheese ID. So let's go to the next table, customer. In customer, you have a customer ID and then the customer names and things like that. Note that the customer ID is just the first 4 letters of the cheese itself. So it is not a number, so it is a text here. So let's take a look at the design view. The design view proves that, yeah, sure, it is a text. There is a text, and so primary key is a text. And of course, we have all the things about the customers, everything about the customer. The third table, order. In order, we have order ID and then customer ID, order date, and shipping date, pay dates, and type of pay, that is how they paid and things like that, and then some notes. So let's take a design view look. The design view tells us that the order ID is a number, the customer ID is a short text, so we can see that the customer and the order can be related using this customer ID as a foreign key. And then there are a bunch of dates and things like that that we need to look at. Let's take a look at order details. The order details has got order ID and then product ID and then quantity. So let's take the view. The quantity ordered and the order ID is here. Order ID is a number. The product ID is a text. But then both these are not prime keys. They don't have, and this table does not have a key which is prime. Okay, so that is okay. Sometimes if the table need not be put to relation to another table, okay, then you don't need a primary key. So it is okay not to have a primary key also in certain cases. So note that. Then we have product. In product, we have product ID, cheese ID, supplier ID, and so on and so forth, and all the descriptions about the product. Let's take a view of this. The design view tells us that the product ID is a text, and the cheese ID and supplier ID are also text, and product ID is our primary key. Then we have what is called specialty, and in specialty we have let's take a design view and it says ID is there, which is a primary key, and then you have category, item number, price, in stock, so on and so forth. And then let's look at supplier. The supplier has got a supplier ID, and let's look at, there is a text, and then it has got all the information about the supplier. Now we can go and do an ER diagram. Now that we know all the data that is in this table, in this database, and all the tables, let's do an ER diagram. So I'm going to get out of all these things. And then I'm going to do an ER diagram. So let's take a quick look at how the ER diagram looks like. Okay, so the first table that I'm going to look for is the customer table. The customer table has got customer ID, which is the primary key. And then it has got the name and everything about the customer. Now you have the next table, which is order. In order, you have an order ID, which is the primary key. And then you have customer ID. And it has got a lot of dates and the pay type and so on and so forth. The third table is our order details. In order details, you have order ID, you have product ID, and you have quantity ordered. Then you have product as the next table that we are going to take a look at. In product, we have product ID, which is the primary key. And in order details, we don't have a primary key, as we are already noted. Then it has got all the information about the products. Then I have a table called cheese. And the cheese has got what is called a cheese ID as a primary key. And cheese origin, and everything about the cheese. In product ID, in the product table, I also have cheese ID. Then the other table that I want to take into consideration is the supplier. The supplier has got supplier ID, which is the primary key, and then everything about the supplier. Supplier ID is also found as, can be used as a foreign key and is found in the product table. The last one, which is the specialty, has got it has got an ID, which is the primary key, and then it has got the category and the name and so on and so forth. Okay, let's establish the relationships now. As now we have all the entities, let's do the relationship. So this customer ID can be connected to this customer ID and as 1 to infinity. This order ID can be connected to this order ID as 1 to infinity, 1 to many relationship. This product ID can be connected to this product ID as 1 to many relationship. This cheese ID can be connected to this cheese ID as 1 to many. This supplier ID can be connected to this supplier ID as 1 to many. We do not have anything here. We have a primary key, but there is no foreign key. if we need to connect this specialty to the product, we need to have this ID in the product. So we need to create another field name called ID here, and then make sure that we have all the IDs of the specialty to the correct product. For instance, if it is a holiday feast gift box, then we're going to have maybe 2 or 3 or 4 of these products, because there is a package. So we need to establish that. So each one of the package, so let's say the holiday feast gift box has an ID of let's see what that is, H243. Okay, so when you create this ID here, then whatever cheese we have will have 243 as this ID here. Okay, that's how we do it. So that'll become the package. Okay, and that is the way to establish the relationship. If we need to set the relationship between specialty and the product. Okay, great. So now make sure that you do this in a piece of paper, and then we need to now take all this stuff and then put it in the physical database. This is the logical database. We need to put it in the physical database. So let's go ahead and start doing that. So here I'm going to start the relationships now. To get the relationships, I'm going to click on Database Tools and click on Relationships. I'm going to bring each one of the tables here. I have the customer. I'm going to bring the order. I'm going to bring the order detail. I'm going to bring the product. I'm going to bring the cheese. And I'm going to bring the supplier. And I don't need to bring the specialty. If I need to bring the specialty, then I need to do the right things first, like creating an ID here for the specialty. Maybe I'll call it specialty ID, and then I can do that. But right now, I'm not going to do that because we don't need to establish anything at all. Okay, let's form the relationships. So this customer ID and this customer ID can be formed relationships. So I'm going to click on this and grab it and drop it on this customer ID. I'm going to enforce the relationship. I'm going to cascade, make sure that I have one-to-many, and I'm going to create one. Similarly, this customer order ID and this order ID can be related. So I'm going to click on these 3, one-to-many relationship, create, and I've created that. I have product ID here, I have product ID here. So since this is the primary key, I'm going to select this and then bring it and drop it on this product ID so that I can make sure that I have these check marks here on these boxes, and I'm going to create that. Similarly, I'm going to do the cheese ID to this cheese ID, and I'm going to make the check marks here, and then I'm going to create that. Similarly, I'm going to take the supplier ID and then put it to the supplier ID. I'm going to enforce a relationship in the cascading. This is also one-to-many, and I'm going to create. Okay. So now I have all the relationships, one-to-many relationships. In every one of them, I've created the relationships. Now I can start doing the queries. So I'm going to close this and save it. And now the relationships are saved. If I want to see the relationships, I can click on Database Tools, click on Relationships. I see the relationships. Okay, let's do the query in the next video.